Okay, we're coming now to our fourth study on understanding the acts of the sinful nature, and this is part two of disorders in personal relationships. As we pointed out last time, there were 8 different, if you like, disorders in personal relationships, and last time we dealt with hatred, which resulted in enmity or quarrels. We looked at discord, which could cause strife, and we looked at jealousy, which are often very closely associated with envy, and they were fits of rage or wrath or outbursts of anger. And we looked at all those last time. This time we're going to look at 4 more. Selfish ambition, which can cause strife and factions and disputes. Then we have dissensions, which can cause divisions, factions, heresies, party intrigues, and then envy, another word for envy and jealousies. Very strong, isn't it, this stuff on envy and jealousy? It seems to be endemic in human nature, doesn't it? Anyway, let's look at this selfish ambition, this strife, this factions. The word is derived from the Greek word erithos, which means a hireling, a hired hand, and originally meant working for pay. It then came to mean canvassing for office, and so became used of competing parties. It was there in Judaism between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, if you like. It was there in philosophy in the pagan world between the Stoics and the Epicureans. As such, it probably refers especially to a selfish ambition which gives rise to factions and party strife. That's probably what it is. and it was there in early Christianity too. We mentioned this before. My brothers and sisters, 1 Corinthians 1:11-12. Some from Chloe's household have informed me that there are quarrels among you, factions amongst you. I follow Apollos, I follow Cephas, another I follow Christ. And what's going on here? I'm a follower of Peter, oh, I'm a follower of Apollos, I'm a follower of Paul. Oh, but I follow Christ, I'm better than all of you. Well, we all follow Christ, you know, and we got to be very careful. I'm a Methodist, or I'm a Baptist, or I'm an Anglican. No, it doesn't matter. We are believers, we are Christians, and that's the main thing. We may like different forms of worship, but that should not be a cause for a faction in Christianity. 2 Corinthians 12:20, we mentioned this in the last study. Paul had to go there and sort some of this stuff out. And he says, I'm afraid that when I come, I may not find you as I want you to be. And you may not find me as you want me to be. I'll probably be more stricter and tougher and talk, rather bluntly. I fear that there may be discord, jealousy, fits of rage, and selfish ambition in that group. Some people want to push their views. Some people want to get a following, or something like that, whatever that cause was. We don't really know. But there was selfish ambition in that church at Corinth, and there may well be in some of our churches, perhaps. If you remember Philippians 1:17, we talked about that in verse 15. He says, it is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry. Dear oh me. He goes on to say, that's that group, preach the Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing they can stir up trouble for my chains while I'm in prison. Oh, Paul, you're yesterday's man. How many people have you brought to Christ in the last 6 months? We have done this. We have done that. We are doing better than you. That's not the right attitude. That's not the right attitude. They may well have introduced Christ to more people than Paul had done for the previous time he'd been in prison for 2 years in Rome and 2 years before that in Caesarea. Well, okay, fair enough. They should have sympathy with Paul and say, Paul, you're in prison. Don't worry. We're doing our best, and we have seen quite a number of people come to believe in Jesus. That's fair enough. And then he goes on and talks about this. It was, I don't know whether this was a problem in the church at Philippi. Verse 3 says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. How about that? Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. Each of you should look not only to your own interests. Yes, you're going to have interests, and this can cause problem in our churches. You may have young families with small children, and they want certain things in the church, like a Sunday school and a creche. But then you may have old people who want something totally different. They may want, a lunch once a week to have some fellowship, because some of them are widows or widowers. Well, okay, fair enough. Which is the most important? Well, it's not for me to decide, right? It's don't push your own agenda. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, thinking my idea is better, and if I do this, it'll be good. Rather, in humility, value others. The younger should value the old should value the younger. And don't only look to what you want, realize there's other people who have different interests, different priorities at their stage of life. Then you have these dissensions and divisions. Um, they do occur, don't they? Eh? In Romans 16:17, he writes to the Romans and he says to them, I urge you, brother, to watch out for those who cause divisions and who put obstacles in your way that are contrary to the teaching you have learned. Keep away from them. So there are obviously people that cause divisions in the church. People come into a church and they want this and they want that, and they be very careful. Be very, very careful. And these divisions are bad, aren't they? And that's what they get. And in 1 Corinthians 3:3, this is what it says in the King James Version, which is interesting. Right. Whereas ye are yet carnal, for whereas there is among you envying and strife and divisions, are you not carnal and walk as mere men? Yes, there were divisions, and some people liked those divisions and wanted those divisions, and some people caused those divisions. Ugh. In classical Greek, the word meant dispute, disunity, strife in general, and also political opposition, revolt, and rebellion. That's what Nordholt says in his New International Dictionary of New Testament Theology. And I must admit, the dissension and divisions have cast a slur on Christendom since the Reformation. And, first of all, you had the Anglican and the Catholics. Then you had the Puritans coming out of the Anglican Church. Then you had the Baptists coming out. Then you had the Methodists coming out of the Anglican Church. You had the Salvation Army coming out of the Methodists. You had the Brethren coming out of the Anglican Church. But in fact, there's been more and more splits in independent churches, quite a lot. And the more biblical churches are, it seems more likely you get these divisions, because they split on certain doctrines which are not essential. Some things are worthy of debate, and some things have been debated for centuries and still not resolved. Arminianism versus Calvinism. Dear oh me, big subjects they are. And you may take one view, somebody else may take another. Discuss it over coffee. Don't quarrel and don't cause a division over it. And there's other things that people have caused dissension over. Factions, heresies, party intrigues is what the New English Bible says. And this is the word that gives us heresies and heretics, words which have become associated with unorthodox doctrine, or what people consider unorthodox doctrine. See, the fundamental idea behind this Greek word is choice, and it need not be used in a bad sense. For example, it can refer to a group of people who have chosen a certain set of beliefs or a certain way of life, such as Christians. That's the choice we've made. And there was the choice of whether you will want a Sadducee or a Pharisee. Remember in Acts 15, we read there, Oh, what do we read there? In Acts 15, verse 5. Just get it. Then some of the believers who belonged to the party of the Pharisees stood up and said, so they were of the party of the Pharisees, but they were believers in Christ. So we usually boo the Pharisees, but there were some who believed in Christ. And in Acts 26, I think it is, verse 5, what do we get there? What does he say? The Jews all know the way I have lived ever since I was a child, says Paul, from the beginning of my life in my own country and also in Jerusalem. They have known me for a long time and can testify, if they are willing, that according to the strictest sect of our religion, I was a Pharisee. There we are, the word sect. That's what it is. So it needn't necessarily be used in a bad sense. Quite often it is used in a bad sense, it need not be. When it is used in a bad sense, it refers to a faction who have chosen to be different and alien to the church. Okay, that's what it is. Somebody who's chosen to be different. Now, what have they chosen to be different about? Maybe you go to a church that doesn't give emphasis to some good thing which you think they ought to give emphasis to, and they're not doing it. So you've chosen to be different to the church you're attending. Now, what do? Do you quietly leave, or do you stay there and say it's good in all other respects, or do you cause a party intrigue? In other words, do you behave like a heretic? Do you behave like somebody who wishes to cause division? So division is not necessarily, or the cause of the division is not necessarily a heretical doctrine, it's heretical behavior. Look at Titus chapter 3, verses 10 and 11. He says, avoid foolish controversies and genealogies and arguments and quarrels about the law, because they are unprofitable and useless. That's true. Warn a divisive person once, and then warn them a second time. After that, have nothing to do with him. You see, you do get a divisive person. You get somebody who comes into a church or into a fellowship and he wants a following. He wants to push his agenda. No, that's not right. You see, with this word, the problem is not heretical theology, but the heretical behavior of causing division. That a person may hold an unorthodox doctrine, but that doesn't make him a heretic, and he may sit there quietly and cause no trouble at all. On the other hand, a person with a very conformist theology may be quite divisive because he wants to push something and to get a following and to cause division. Then we got envy, jealousies. And of course, the main problem about envy is to regard another person with ill will. You regard another person with ill will simply because of what he has or she has, or what he is or what she is, or what good thing he does or what good thing she does. In other words, one person can envy the good in another. And no. And that envy, if you're like that, that envy can eat you. It can eat your heart. Moses suffered from people who were envious of Moses. People were envious of Paul. And Paul warned Timothy that everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted in one way or another. And envy is one of the ways in which people can be envied. So from the context and from Paul's life, we find that most of the persecutions he suffered came from the hands of religious men. When we read of suffering and persecution in the New Testament, sadly, many people automatically assume it's persecution at the hands of Nero, but it's not. Nero didn't start his persecution of Christians until Paul, well, about AD 66, I think, is about the time Paul was writing his last letter to Timothy. Before that, practically all of the persecutions were either at the hands of Jewish religious leaders, or the Jewish religious leaders got the Roman authorities on their side. It's like Christ was persecuted by and argued against by the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin, the chief priests, and all that. And the high priest, they got the Romans on their side to crucify him. Paul, a number of times, when he was on his missionary journeys, yes, the Jewish synagogue leaders got annoyed with him. Sometimes they persecuted themselves. Sometimes, one time they stoned him, dear oh me, but he got up. Other times they got the Roman authorities on their side and put him in prison or had him hounded out of the town. So, sometimes people can be envious of us because we're different. We don't swear. Lots of swearing in our society. So people try to pull us down to their level by saying things about us. All right? That's what they do. Everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. You don't get drunk. So much drinking nowadays. Dear oh me. Oh, what do they say to you? Ridicule you perhaps because you don't drink, or you don't drink much. You might just have one and then stop after it, or two and stop after it. Yeah, you'll get ridiculed and things like this. So, well, maybe we won't be persecuted like people were in Bible times. We won't be stoned to death or something like that. But, Christians can have it tough in our society. There we go. So we've looked at all these disorders in personal relationships. This time we looked at how selfish ambition can cause strife and factions and disputes. We've talked about dissensions, which can cause divisions, and factions and heresies. But remember, the thing about heresies is not so much the doctrine, it's the behavior which causes the split, is the heresy. And then we've looked at envy again. So how much does this apply to modern day churches? How much does this apply today? Well, I don't know. You'll have to think about that, and think about what goes on in your church and other churches, and think if, well, maybe then it's not particularly bad, but we do have sort of little groups in our church, or we do have one particular group. Well, okay, are they causing any problems? Maybe the best thing to do is not get too upset with them, but to befriend them. Because what do we love? Smooths over everything. Love covers many disputes. That's what we read last time.